Welcome to the Workshop Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew, and today joining me, I feel like I should have a really dramatic and thought out introduction, but I don't. So I'm not going to. I'm just going to introduce the Grant Alexander himself.
Oh,
Welcome
you
to
for
the
that.
podcast.
That was a wonderful, thoughtful introduction. I really appreciated all the details you went into about me and what I do. And that was wonderful.
Well, I do know some details. You are Canadian. You live in Ottawa.
Yeah.
Did you actually live in Ottawa, or are you on the outskirts in the...
So I'm in Nepean, which used to be its own city, and it was actually even bigger than Ottawa, but then there was an amalgamation, and so now it's part of Ottawa. Yeah.
Okay, so you are in Ottawa, and since I'm Western Canadian, I'm from Alberta. I'm obligated to despise you completely.
Understood.
It's just complete
Feelings mutual.
It's complete Canadian culture revelation for American listeners here. Those of us in Western Canada, it's part of our citizenship to despise people from the East, and people from the East to despise people from the West.
Right.
Except for all the Maritimers who all work in Alberta.
Right. And it's not even, you don't even hate the people from the East. It's more you just hate the people from Ottawa, because that's where the federal government is.
It's true.
And you're just anti-government. I get it. I understand.
Well, and Toronto. But then everybody hates Toronto except for Toronto.
I think that people in Toronto hate Toronto people, so.
That's why it's such a terrible place.
Yeah.
Montreal. Western Canadians are also obligated to hate Montreal.
Mm.
And I think that kind of goes back to the whole government thing though too, right? Because basically Ottawa, Toronto, and Montreal control the entire rest of the country.
Yeah. Fair. We do. That's 100%. Everything I do is just to try and put the screws to people in Alberta.
Yeah. That's our Prime Minister's goal. At least it was his father's anyway.
Well, let's not get into politics from countries that no one cares about.
Hey, we're one of the most important countries in the world to Canadians.
Yep. We're probably second on most people's list in Canada.
Yeah. Anyway, yes, other details. I do know you work for the government. I won't share what you do because we have talked about that. But then again, since I'm Albertan, I have again obligated to despise you for that.
Yep.
Let's see what else. What else?
That's all good.
You're disappointed that I didn't stop and visit you on the way by there.
That's right. You were so close. Driving all that way, you couldn't just pop in for a glass of water.
It goes back to that prejudice, right?
Right. But instead of us belaboring this point, I'll just say, I'm a maker who lives in Canada and likes to make stuff, and then I like to make videos about making stuff.
Oh, there we go.
There you go.
Well, what are you working on currently? Because is that your Maker Swap thing? I see you wailing on some metal and stuff on the social medias.
Unfortunately, I'm not going to make anything for Maker Swap this year for a couple of reasons. One, I bought my tickets late. Didn't want to go into a bunch of debt to buy tickets just to do something, and by the time you factor in gas and all the other crap that goes into going down to Maker Camp, I was just like, I want to make sure I have the money before I do it. So I waited till I had the money, and then on top of that, Keith got into my head with talking about you had to bring your best, and I was like, well, I don't know if I have a best. I don't know if my best is good enough for Keith, and that was mainly that's just more of a. I didn't think I had enough time to dedicate to doing something that I thought would be considered my best.
Fair enough. Although you did shoot my, I was going to make a joke about how Keith said something about it's okay to bring a keychain, but I don't.
If I brought a keychain,
ruined that for me.
It would be the best keychain. It would be $100 bills wrapped up in a.
Well, there you go. That wouldn't take too much time. You take your $100 bill, cast it in epoxy.
Yep.
I mean, if you're taking a Canadian $100 bill down there, I guess it's only like $50, but still cast that in resin, drill a little hole in it. Looks expensive.
Maybe next year. maybe next year. But yeah, no, I just had that. So what I'm actually working on is a fire pit. Like the bottom piece of my fire pit rusted away, and it's like circular, like stamped sheet metal thing, and it rusted away. And the rest of the fire pit looks much better. Lot, still a little rusty, but not. It's still got at least 5 years left in it. So I had some sheet metal sitting around, and I thought I'd try my hand at whacking away with it at a hammer, and I took it out of the form today, and it turned into a potato chip. So I had to put it back in the form and keep working on it.
Beat it some more. That's the one thing actually about metal that is probably a little more forgiving is the repairability of it.
Yeah, I think if you know what you're doing, maybe.
That's true. That's true. I actually one of my many jobs that I don't think I've ever actually talked about is when I worked in the oil field. I did industrial insulation for a while.
Oh,
so I did lots of sheet metal type of things and all of that forming and, rolling beads and crimping and hammering things into place and all that jazz.
Yes, I'm eventually going to have to figure out how to make the edge of it roll over in a circle. I don't even know how to roll it over on a flat, so it'll be fun.
On a circle, it's pretty difficult, especially to do it without like a bead roller.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. But hey, guess what? I didn't do this because I thought it was easy. Or I didn't do this because I thought it was hard. I did it because I thought it was going to be easy, even though it is hard.
Yeah. Have you seen the reel that's been around about how do you know how to do all this stuff? Like, because I grew up poor.
Yeah.
If I didn't learn how to do it, it didn't happen.
That is how a lot of the stuff happens, for sure. If I want something, I could. But then I think about it and I look and I go, in reality, that's not true. Because if I just didn't spend any of that time making this stuff and buying the tools, even if you get like, none of my tools are like new and fancy or anything like that, or most of them aren't. If I didn't spend all that time and money on the tools and the materials, I could have taken all that money and just bought the things I made, and I guarantee I'd be ahead.
Oh yeah,
but
yeah, you could take all the time. Yeah, you could take all the time that you spent goofing off and go work at McDonald's and probably make enough money to buy all the crap that you're. But at the same time, then you're then you're working at McDonald's, and no offense to anybody who does that, but I would rather be wasting my time in my shop.
And this is where it's a lot, like, that's what I mean. Like, psychologically speaking, if I had spent all that time working like I did when I was like in my early 20s, it was all work, right? It was like focusing on work and school. So I went to school full time and I worked like 30 or 40 hours a week. So if school is considered to be like a full-time job of 40 hours, well, then I was also working another 30 to 40 every week. And that was what I did for quite a long time. And you can only do that so much when you're not feeling the, I guess in school you have that little bit of creativity sometimes, hopefully, that you can get an outlet. But if you're not making things, I don't know people who don't make, I don't know what their outlet is. But
video games.
That's not an outlet. Like, you're not.
Or shopping.
That's an inlet, right? I think that's probably why there's a lot of depressed people out there.
I think so, actually. That's one of the things that I've been digging into literature whenever I have a chance to do it for school is handcraft and depression, mental illness. Mm-hmm. And I'm there's very little information there. There's a bunch of like art therapy stuff that's a creative outlet, but I'm more interested in like the specific hand skill, craft, more so than most of the art therapy is like expressive painting sort of things, which is fine. It has its place, but there's an entire realm beyond painting that requires people to have skills, and I wonder personally if it's like a mental thing for people to I don't know how to do this, and that's a mental weight on them, right? Like I can't
Right.
change a light bulb. I can pay somebody to do it, but there's still that background of I'm incompetent because I have to pay somebody to do this, right?
That's probably what I feel like the most, and probably why I do things that I shouldn't be, like, I shouldn't be doing them. Like, even like I'll get up on my roof and I'm afraid of heights to change shingles. I shouldn't be doing that. I should just be paying people. But I needed to do it first myself before I was willing to pay someone else to do it.
Yeah.
So that I could say, no, I know how to do it. I just happen to have extra money, I guess. That's why I'm doing it this time. I'm paying someone. That, I've rationalized in my head this, way of making sure that I don't feel incompetent is because I've been up there. I've replaced the shingles when they've blown off before. So the next time it happened, and it wasn't the ones that I installed, the next time a bunch of shingles blew off, I called someone up. And the difference between the time it took me, which was probably from the moment I arrived on the site with the shingles, was probably 4 hours when I finally got down. And they came, and they were up on the roof, and they replaced 3 times as much shingles as I did. They were up on the roof and back down in 10 minutes. It was insane. And I'm up there I don't know. When you don't know what you're doing, you're so inefficient at it, right? And you're making sure got to get these nails in just perfect. Got to make sure I get the roof sealant stuff to really get it good on there and make sure there's no gaps or anything like that. And when you're experienced, you do stuff so much better. But
Yeah, and you get my problem is that I end up putting furniture maker precision into rough carpentry projects, right?
right.
And I've built houses before too, so I know rough carpentry, but there's this background part of me that's but it's a 64th of an inch out of square. Doesn't make a difference on a rough frame wall, but it still bothers me.
Right. Well, this is where I really like Anne of all trades. If you watch her projects over time, she knows when to use rough carpentry and when to use furniture level. When you start measuring in the 64ths, you're getting into metalwork, right? When you need to take out digital calipers for doing something in woodworking, you've done it wrong, in my opinion.
You've definitely done it differently. Did you follow Daryl Peart at all, or Daryl
No.
Peart?
No, I
So
don't
he's a furniture maker in Seattle or something like that. I think is where he is, somewhere in Washington. But he does a lot of CNC stuff with his furniture making, and he does some really good, cool stuff. He does a lot of green and green style furniture, and anyway, he's big into perfectly accurate measurements, but there's a place for that, but for the most part, you see the people who are setting up their table saw with their calipers or whatever, and they're measuring everything to the thousandths of an inch. Your humidity change tomorrow is going to change how that fits.
Right. And that's why you got to understand. You have to understand everything to understand why. And I think we were talking about this in the pre-show. It's you need to, the pre-show, after show, wherever you put it, the Patreon exclusive part of this.
Thank you for the plug. Go sign up on Patreon so you can talk. You can hear what we're talking about.
Right. But it's you need to know the rules to know when you need to break them, right? So you need to have your fence needs to be aligned perfectly. Getting your fence to your blade within the thousandths, great. When you're setting it up and making sure it's all great, that sounds like a worthwhile time. Setting up your measurements between the blade and the fence, you don't need that for wood.
No. And even when it comes down to setting up the fence, if you're crap at that and you learn how to use a hand plane, it still doesn't matter.
Right.
I just
Fair.
posted a reel this morning showing some of the furniture that I saw on my trip here, and there's some bloody big gaps in stuff that is in modern art furniture or museums, right? Like art galleries. These are antiques that have lasted 1,000 years, one of them, and it's got some big gaps in it, and it's still holding together fine. I think people over obsess about precision and perfection, and forget the value of it being handmade and not being perfect.
So there's like two problems here. There's the survivor effect, where oftentimes people look at old furniture that's lasted the true test of time, and they go, "We used to make it better, but we didn't." You're just only looking at the stuff that survived, right?
Yeah,
so you didn't see all the garbage like that fell apart because it's not there for you to look at and say, we used to make it better. If we used to make it better, why aren't there so many Model Ts on the road? Like, you know what I mean? Well, we didn't, because they weren't the best car in the world. The cars today are made so much better than cars of 2 decades ago even. But so it's the survivor effect, is you're only seeing that. But it's also it used to be a lot more utilitarian, and if it was good enough, it was good enough. If you look at antique furniture and you look at antique dovetails, they're made to hold it together, not to look. They didn't do it for the looks, right?
Well, yeah, and that's exactly what I mean. Is like, you're right on the whole survivor effect. The stuff that you see, there's millions of pieces that ended up in the fireplace, right, relative to the ones you see. But yeah, and that's what I mean. You look at the dovetails. Like, I saw this Bombay chest of drawers in Springfield, and veneer work is immaculate. It's a beautiful looking piece. And then I'm looking at the drawers, and the back side of these drawers, there's like an 1/8 of an inch gap in the dovetails, right? Yeah. And it's still holding together fine. But
you gotta know the rules if you're gonna break them.
Yeah.
Right.
And you I guess the other side of it too is you see these old pieces of furniture with big gaps and stuff, and you go, oh, look at these big gaps, and you have to recognize that there's some trauma involved in that furniture's life too that's probably caused that. And if it continued down that route, it probably would fall apart.
Well, there's definitely that too, and just thinking about the way it was, like the humidity changes it's gone through in its life, the hot and the cold and the expanding and contracting constantly has probably made it so that it's never gonna look as good as it did when it first came out.
Yeah, and now it's sitting in this perfectly controlled, humidity controlled environment, and now it's stable, but you're still not allowed to touch it because it might fall apart.
Right. Well, so you can be in a perfect environment and still be in the wrong environment. You weren't built for it. So, like, if you're thinking if you think about furniture made 100 years ago, how many people had air conditioning 100 years ago? Right?
No, nobody.
Exactly. So this humidity, they were expecting a higher level of humidity, right? Yep. And now we have like times where there's no humidity in your house, well, relatively speaking.
Well, yeah. I live in southern Alberta, so there is no humidity in my house right now. I think my relative humidity is like 20%.
Right.
And it rained yesterday.
Well, all that, yeah. So I think that's true about people too, is that you could be built for a purpose that you're not in the right environment for, right? It might have been a good environment at one point, but now because of, like you talked about, like a little trauma, or whatever, it's no longer the right place for you. I think you got to think about that when you're considering where your life is going.
Yeah, 100%. And a lot of people, are you familiar with the sunk cost fallacy?
Yes, very much.
I think that happens as well. People, like myself included, I put almost 11 years into my post-secondary education at this point, and then here I am going back and going to school again. And it's been a mental burden for me because I have this, I spent this much money on my education. I spent all of this stuff. And to be truthful, I probably completed my chiropractic degree because of the sunk cost fallacy. Like, I've always kind of not liked my job, but, at this point I've spent this much money, I've got to do it. And anyway, here I am. Again, the vicarious trauma of my youth has created this in this problem in my psyche. But
right. Well, so you said vicarious trauma, and that's the thing I kind of wanted to talk about because of the work I've done. I don't feel like I've had a very traumatic life. I don't think I've gone through a lot of traumatic things in my life, but I have, working for the government, read a lot of traumatic things. If just yesterday or the day before when we're recording this was Orange Shirt Day, and one of the first places I worked was helping to resolve the Indian residential schools claims, and I read thousands of descriptions of physical and sexual abuse of kids, and I called people who were alleged to have conducted these acts, and I called hundreds of those people to ask them whether or not they wanted to participate in the process, to either deny it or some would admit to it, because there was a lot of student-on-student abuse too. So these were like people who had been abused who were then abusing. Anyways, all that to say, I have read a lot, and so vicarious trauma is something that, to me, I've never been diagnosed with it, but I guarantee this is something that affects me. And it's one of those things that kind of starts to affect the way you see life and the way, you get another term for it. It's like compassion fatigue. Because you stop having compassion for the people you're trying to help, right? And now I deal with complaints from mainly the military, people who feel like they're not being treated fairly in the military. And I deal with other people who I think at some points have gotten to this point of they've heard so much. There's a lot of horror stories about people being mistreated in the military. And then on top of that, they can have their own traumatic experience that even if you don't ask about it, they end up telling you, right? Like, it's not part of what they're calling you, but they want you to understand where they're coming from, which I get it. And I get paid to listen, I guess, but it affects me. And then from that, so even if you've never been through anything traumatic, you can still get affected by anyone telling you about their stories.
It's very, very true, and vicarious trauma like that is one of the major things that we discuss in my master's program because of, like you said, also compassion fatigue, right? You hear other people's problems so much that you become burnt out or become traumatized yourself, or begin to suspect everybody of, the reality of life is there's evil people out there. There's bad people who are going to do bad things. But sometimes you get to the point in your head where everybody's a bad person because that's all you ever hear.
Right.
And yeah.
And that is definitely the hard part. So then you go, like when I'm walking through crowds of people, like in my mind, I know I'm having this like, even if it's like 1% of the population are these evil people, regardless of their evil, it's probably not even that high. But in my mind, it's like up in the 10%. Like if I see 100 people, 10 of them are bad people, right? In my mind, they've done like, they're sexual abusers, they're murderers. There's something wrong with these people. So who are they? Like, I'm going to go, maker camp. There's going to be a bunch of people there. There's going to be bad people there. I guarantee it. Right?
Yeah.
But is it really? I don't know. Is that just like my problematic seeing the bad? And so I try and combat it by trying to see the good in everyone. Even in bad people. People who are convicted, I think, still have rights, still need to be treated fairly, right? Even just because you're a bad person doesn't mean, we should just treat you like garbage. We should also treat, try and, depending on the people, because there's some exceptions to this, but I think, we should try and, just because someone's made a mistake, you shouldn't, you shouldn't treat them like garbage, I guess.
Yeah. Interesting that you bring that up, and I don't know if you have any religious affiliation or not, but I do, and
Okay.
we were religiousness aside. Yesterday I was listening to some what we call is a general conference, and so just kind of church leadership were giving talks and stuff, and one of the things that they talked about was this guy shared a story about being sprayed by a skunk, right? And so he gets sprayed by a skunk, and he goes in and he showers himself off, and he, with the tomato juice and the whole 9 yards, and he became nose blind to the smell.
Right.
So he thought he was clean, and so then he goes out into the public and goes to a movie with his family, his wife, who also had got sprayed, and so they're both nose blind to this smell of the skunk. And they get to the theater, and they sit down and start watching the movie, and then about 5 minutes in, people start around them start commenting, "Oh, I think I'm going to go get some popcorn," and they go out get popcorn and then come and sit back somewhere else. And so after the third or fourth person who did this, they realized that, we must still smell like skunk, because everybody around them had moved away. Nobody said anything mean. But the point of his story was everybody has some sort of problem.
Right.
And just because your problem doesn't stink to you doesn't mean that it doesn't stink to other people. And so we shouldn't judge anybody based on their, like, oh, you smell bad, because you probably smell bad too.
Right.
And I think that's the case in most people's lives. It's like, nobody's perfect. But when you become so focused on the trauma that you see or you've heard or stuff like that, then you become a lot more negative about looking around at people and judging them, and forgetting that, you probably have a problem to work on yourself, and so you need to give them a little bit of leeway as well.
Right. And I always think about it. So if you ever had a bad day, but you've been out in public, and so you're just having, like, either you got some bad news or whatever it was, you're out in public and it's really affecting you. And so, a lot of people react differently. You could have been sad, you could have been angry, or whatever it was. And then you have to deal with people because you're out in public. Like, you're riding the bus, or you're in line to get coffee at Tim Hortons or something, and you're just having a bad day. And, you might want to take that out on some other people. And the way I always try and get myself around that is I go, all these other people could be having a bad day too. And you don't know what they're going through. They could be having a worse day than you. They could have just found out that their parents died, but they had to come into work anyways because their boss wouldn't let them have the day off, and they didn't know to stand up for it, right? Or whatever, like a million things could have happened that day. And so I always think about it like, treat everyone like, I don't treat everyone well, but it's like, if anyone ever gives you a little bit of attitude or something, I always go in my mind like, maybe they're just having a bad day, right? I should just be, try and make their day better, instead of like, and I know I'm really bad at it, like reacting with more anger, right? Someone's angry at you, then you come over the top with even more angry, right? Someone flips you the bird, well, you flip them 2 birds, whatever. So, try and think about it. If they're doing that, there's something happening to them that's causing it. And they may not realize it. Like you said, they might be this, sprayed by the skunk and thought they got it all off.
Yeah. In that vein, the first video that I had that really kind of blew up, I started getting the stupid comments, and they'd make me mad, right? And around the same time, I think it was, I was listening to another, it was a book or something about, treating everybody nice and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. Anyway,
And blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And so I realized that that's probably true. Most of these people on the internet are commenting, and they're not thinking about what they're saying. And so I put a keyboard shortcut on my. I've never seen that before.
Yeah, that's weird.
Huh. So for those of you who need to now go on to Patreon and
Watch the video version.
watch the video feed, if I put my thumb up in front of my camera, a little thumb up shows up on the. Yours doesn't do it, eh?
No, my camera doesn't do it. They won't. No thumbs up from me.
Huh. Are you on a Mac?
No.
Maybe it's a Mac thing.
Maybe.
Anyway, where was I? Totally distracted there.
You're reading a book and blah, blah, blah.
And blah, blah, blah. Oh, keyboard shortcut. That's what it is. So now when I get a negative comment on a video, I just type in HTB and it brings up the phrase, says, "Hey, I'm sorry you're having a bad day. I hope tomorrow's better for you."
Nice.
And that, takes me 1 second to do that. And it's surprising how many people will comment back. And so let's say you get 10% negative comments, right? Like that seems to be about what you get.
It depends on the particular video.
That's true. That's about what I get.
Yeah, I'd say overall I probably
of
get less than 10% overall of all my comments.
Probably.
But on a viral video, I can see it's probably 10%.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. So when you're starting to get lots of comments. But anyway, 99% of those people, when you respond with something like that, they will respond to the comment and go, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be a jerk. I'm just having a rough day," and then blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And then that 0.1% of everybody who comes back at you with some sort of offensive comment, they're probably the pieces of garbage people that you don't ever want to talk to anyway. So,
right. Well, so in this reminds me, I really wish you can only have it because you had the experience. But when I started getting negative comments, they would affect me, and then later I learned how to deal with them. Like Chris Powell was actually a really big help, and Austin from High Caliber Craftsman just helping to respond to the comments in ways that are like either just shut them up or get them angry more, or like sometimes it's just like saying sure, like I don't need to deal with this, right? Like I don't, just saying sure should be enough when you're saying a bunch of like negative things to me. And when they get really excited from that, like what I say now is like, I'm sorry that what you're looking for, you weren't able to find what you're looking for in this video.
Yeah, that's a good response. I had one guy, he just, doesn't matter what I say, he'd come back at me about something. And so finally I commented, he's like, "Oh, this is such a waste of time, this video." And I was like, "It totally is. I 100% agree with you. But I really appreciate your commenting because every time you come back, you improve my engagement metrics and you show this video to more people. So you are making me money and I really appreciate it. If you want to argue some more, let's go." He never commented again.
Nice.
It's like, wait a minute, I'm actually helping you.
Right. Now, a lot of people don't get, like, when people say why is this? I also, a lot of people I don't understand the world, and they'll like comment on a video, "Why am I seeing this?" As if I'm the one who's showing the video has any control over why Facebook or Instagram or TikTok showed you this video.
Yeah.
And as if writing that will somehow affect it in the future.
Well, and that's what the funny part about that is, people who comment that are offended that they're seeing your video. The fact that you took the time to comment means that algorithm is going to push more of that content at you.
Right.
It's just... Yeah. Anyway.
Thinking about, do you think that these people who comment such negative things have gone through some sort of trauma? Is trauma the thing that is causing people to have problems with social interactions, like this negative stuff that we're doing here? Like, is that what it is? Or
that's actually what I was going to say. I was going to say exactly that to you, but you beat me to it. So great. Thank you for interviewing me on this podcast. I think that's actually what it is, because prior to starting this degree in psychology, I will admit that I swing to the more, I don't want to say conservative in the I agree with the KKK and anti-environmentalists groups, right? But I grew up, my personal background trauma is I grew up on a farm, and it's my dad was born during World War II, and so that's the, yeah, my dad's 82 this year. But and so my upbringing was very much, you don't cry because that's a sign of weakness. You don't tell people you need help because if you can't do it yourself, you're not a valuable human being, right? And so prior to starting this degree in psychology, trauma to me was a snowflake term, for lack of a better way to say it. Is like, oh, I have trauma from this, I have trauma from that. So for me, trauma is, I went through the war, or my husband was killed in front of me. That to me was what trauma is.
But now
I still think we use the word trauma a little bit too liberally, but I don't think you're traumatized because your parents disciplined you as a child. Can you be damaged from that? 100%. But was it trauma? Like are you familiar with C.S. Lewis at all?
Yep.
So Chronicles of Narnia, right?
Yep.
I was reading one of his books, and one of his kind of more philosophy books, and he talks about the power and the importance of words. And if you use, for example, a gentleman, that's the example he was using. A gentleman used to mean a person who owned land. That's what it meant.
Right.
And so as time progressed, the word became more and more vague to, he's a gentleman means he's a good person. But he makes this argument of, we already have a word that means he's a good person, and that's he's a good person. And so we bring this word trauma into play in all of these different situations where my mom yelled at me when I was 5 years old. My mother was killed in front of me in the Holocaust. These are vastly different experiences, but we use the same word for it.
And this is something that I feel really strongly about as well, is when we're talking to someone, we need to define these words we're using to make sure we're talking about the words the same way, right? And this is where politicians are often very good at utilizing words in ways that they mean them a specific way, whichever way they lean. It doesn't matter, they all do it.
Yep.
And we're hearing them the way we think about them. And I'll give an example, like the party of family values. And an average person hearing that is going to think, oh, well, I have a family. I think family values are a good thing. I like, my wife, my kids, whatever. Or my two husbands, you could say a gay family. Yeah, I'm good with that. But the party of family values doesn't want a gay family, right? That's what they're trying to say. That's what their message is that they only want a particular looking family with that. And I had a friend who was very conservative, but also very open with this other stuff. And he didn't know that. And I said, go look it up. Go look on their website and see what they mean by it. Look into it further and not the, slogan. Yep. You need to delve deep into how the people are using the words. And I think someone who's really good at using words and I think is really good at getting to the nuance of stuff is Nick Offerman. And if you've read his books, he definitely, he uses a lot of different words. So he likes to, I'm sure he's got a really good thesaurus out there, but he does talk about the usage of words and why they mean something and what they mean, and how they've somehow changed over time, or how they don't mean what we think they mean.
Well, we end up interpreting everything through the basis of our perception, and
Yes.
that's another cognitive bias that everybody has, is that I assume that you believe what I believe, and so when I use a
Right.
specific word, I assume that you know what I mean by that, and that you understand that word to be the same way, and that goes to your like party of family values. It's that's true, and then going to the vicarious trauma or whatever of YouTube commenters,
Yeah.
it's they. I've noticed a lot of times that they often will argue with you about the point that you made, but you didn't use the word they would use, and so
Yes.
you're trying to tell me something that I said, but you just are saying it differently.
Right. So I was recently got into some arguments online about residential schools because it's something that I, one, have a lot of knowledge about, and two, have a pretty big care factor in it in my life. And everyone says the last residential school closed in 1996, and it didn't. It closed in 1998. And the big difference is over time, after the 70s and into the 80s, especially in the 80s, they transferred control of the schools to the bands. And this becomes relevant because not all of them were able to be transferred. But when they transferred them to the bands, they still had a fiduciary responsibility because they only got the money for the school if they did reporting, and like they basically just who the check was signed by just changed for all the employees, right? So the last one closed in 1998. And I got in all these arguments with people who kept going, well, no, this website says this says this says this. And they're like, no, the last federally run one closed in 1996. And I said, yeah, in the last residential school closed in 1998. And I go, we're talking about residential schools here. If you start talking about putting adjectives in front of them, then yes, you can make more specific. The last Catholic one closed in 1970, right? The last Catholic-run residential school closed in 1970. Okay, great. But guess what? Church was still involved until 1998. You still had a church on the thing. The church that just transferred the control over to the government, who then took and hired all these people who worked there. And anyways, you have to, like, using the words. Words have meaning. Words have nuance. And, you know, they change over time. And you need to be really... To have a good conversation with anyone about anything, well-informed debate about something, you need to get down to what do you mean by when you say this? And I want to make sure we're on the same page before we argue about the same point for an hour on the internet.
Yeah, 100%.
But, so instead of using trauma, I was talking with a doctor who does reports. She's an epidemiologist. I believe that's the way you say it.
Epidemiologist.
The epidemiologist. Yeah, words have pronunciations too. I'm just not very good at it. But she did this study, and this is for work, so this is how it all ties into something I know. So she was doing this study about childhood maltreatment. So she didn't use the word trauma. She used maltreatment because maltreatment is the experience. Trauma is what happened, right?
Yeah.
So this is where I think using the term maltreatment could help that vocabulary that you're talking about of not knowing it. Anyways, the basic of it was if you're in the... You're more likely to have gone through a maltreatment if you're in the Canadian Armed Forces. And then if you are later... You do go through... This just general statistic is there's more people in the Canadian Armed Forces that have gone through maltreatment as a child. And then secondly... If you have gone through maltreatment as a child and then suffer some sort of traumatic experience as an adult, you're more likely to have a worse reaction. So the doctor's name is Dr. Afifi. If anyone wants to look into it, she has some reports on that are long, but that's like the pull away that I took out of it is the amount of people that I'm going to be dealing with. I'm going to... I don't want to assume everyone's gone through it, but I want to be mindful of the fact that this is something that could be affecting them. And then on top of that, I want to be mindful of the fact that if they've talked about some sort of traumatic experience, it's more likely they'll have a more severe effect. And take that into consideration while I'm dealing with whatever I'm dealing with. Because I'm not a psychologist. I'm not going to be dealing with their feelings or anything or helping them through that. But being mindful of that will help me with my work and dealing with them.
Yeah. And that actually, the kind of the flip side of that same coin, I just ran across a study called the Dartmouth Scar Study.
Okay.
I think I've seen a video or two about it on social media, so some people might have seen it. But what happened is they took these women and they did a makeup scar on them, right? Like cosmetic makeup, and told them that this study is about interviewers' reactions to facial disfigurement. And so you're going to go do these job interviews, and we want you to report back how they reacted based on your, if you felt like you were treated differently because you have a scar on your face, right?
Right.
And so then before they left the room, the makeup artist said, okay, let's just touch this up, make sure it looks really good and authentic. And what they did is they actually removed the scar. And so they showed the woman the scar in the mirror and then talked about this thing. And then they removed the scar and the person left the room thinking that they still had this scar on.
Right.
And so then they went through these series of interviews, and they were something on the order of 40 to 60% more likely to report negative feedback or negative responses from these people who were interviewing them. And so the takeaway of the study was, if you were primed to assume that you're going to be victimized, then you're more likely to feel victimized.
Right.
And I think that goes to experience as a child, or experience throughout your life, where or the vicarious trauma thing. You can only experience what you know. And so if you know violence, or if you know being victimized at some point, then you can observe that, and you're more likely to report it in the future. But then going back to our earlier conversation, the flip side of that is the people who smell like a skunk don't realize that they smell like a skunk, and they're using words that you feel are traumatizing to you when they didn't actually intend that.
So intention is such a hard thing. First two things. One, a lot of people who've gone through something think everyone's gone through it. That's one of the big things they found out of this studies that they were doing. So people think that wasn't maltreatment and everyone must have gone through it, right? Whatever, they got whatever maltreatment they went through, unless it is the highest level that you see in movies as for maltreatment. But if it's the low, the stuff that's, I don't want to call it lower level, but just not as dramatic, then people think that's what everyone went through. But the other thing is, where was I going with this? What was your last words?
I don't remember.
Skunks.
We'll have to play it back. Yeah, skunks. People who
so
don't.
You were talking about, right. So, when we think that, if you go into a conversation thinking everyone's gone through what you've gone through, and you treat them that way, then that becomes problematic, right? But intention, that's what it was. You were talking about intention. It is so important to understand people's intention, and everybody judges people. They judge themselves on their intentions, and they judge everyone else on their actions. And it is a huge thing that when somebody told that to me, I went, oh my God, that flipped a switch in my brain.
Yeah, I actually just read a couple studies, because my current course is ethics, and there's lots of studies where people will judge themselves. Well, I had a good intention, but everybody judges them on their action, and that's very true. and that's
So
where going down the route of extreme trauma. That was one of the things that arose from the Nuremberg trials. Like the post Nazi
right,
Germany stuff. Was there's all of these people that they were just doing their jobs. They weren't in and of themselves evil people, but they were just doing what they were supposed to be doing. And to speak to my innate prejudice against people who work for the government, the the term the bureaucracy of evil came out of
right.
that, or the banality of evil, where people they do inherently evil things, but they have no responsibility for it because it's somebody else's job or somebody else is responsible for it, or their intention was to do a good thing, but their position was manipulated into it being a bad thing.
So I deal with that a lot. It's like these. So there's like Canadian Armed Forces members. I'm sure just like Americans, they end up getting posted to different bases, and it's all part of a big giant machine of so many positions to fill, so many people to fill them. Only certain qualifications, certain ranks need to get moved around, and so you'll have these people who go, well, I need a X rank here. I need a master corporal here. So I'm going to give this corporal a promotion, get him over there. He's going to love it. He's going to get a promotion out of this deal, right? And the intention is good, right? But they never check with the guy or girl and go, is this something you're interested in? And the guy goes, well, right now, probably not, because after spending got posted here 2 years ago, and we got on the list for oncologists, and because my wife found out that she has cancer, and we just got into the oncologist, and now you want to post me to Cold Lake, Alberta, where there's no oncologist? I'm not taking a promotion for that, right? Like, so the intention was good, but it definitely had a harm on this person's family, right? So these are the types of things that I often deal with is that people don't you gotta check yourself, right? You gotta check what you're doing. Is it actually having the intent you want? Are your actions having the intent you want? Because intentions matter so much, but they also don't. So if you drop a brick on my foot is broken whether you meant to drop it or not, right?
Yeah, it's the saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right?
Right. Yeah. No, anyways, I think a lot of this is like what I like to take is that whole, if someone is reacting in a way you're not expecting to whatever you're doing, roll it back and figure out whether or not your actions and intentions are known, and then have a conversation with that person, right? Because if you are doing something and someone is, and you think it's going to be good for them, whatever it is, right, and they like react in a negative way, you need to figure out why that person is reacting negatively, because they don't know your intentions, they don't know why you did something. They like I know it's probably not like it's going to make me sound like a little whiny baby, but so we're in the hospital after my wife gives birth, and we've been, if you have kids and you've gone through that process and you've been in the room, you don't get any sleep at all. And so my mother-in-law comes to visit us, despite us. We told her when to come. She comes early. So that all of a sudden I'm already defensive about that because we weren't ready to have her come in the room and stuff. But whatever, she's there and she's like, I got you coffee. And she got me a coffee, and she's like, and I got you cream and sugar because I didn't know how you took it. And I'm like, well, you could have texted me, but I don't like cream in my coffee. I like milk in my coffee. It's not like a big deal. It makes me feel like a little whiny baby, but I hadn't really slept, and I didn't really say anything to her at the time, but I was just like, I know her intentions were good. She was trying to be nice, bring this coffee, right? But the whole time I was just thinking like, you've known me for this long and you don't know how I take my coffee, and you can't be bothered to like think that someone would want milk in their coffee instead of cream. And that's like going through my mind because I haven't slept enough, and I'm just like, I'm sure on my face it looks like it. But it was just one of those things where you just go, I want to like I know the intentions were good, but I also know that they weren't fully thought out.
Yeah, and that's then. But then you go down the route of, well, maybe I shouldn't do anything because I don't want to offend anybody, and going back to our trauma, that's why I think words are important and how they're used, and having that defined thing of this is what this word means, and we only use it in this situation. But then you have to ask, well, maybe you feel that somebody offering cream in your coffee is the equivalent of the Holocaust. But
then that's a problem.
Well, and that's where it's really that's why the world's a confusing place. I guess that's where we need to.
And this is so. I tell that story. I know people are gonna say like, "Grant, you're an idiot," and I get it. I am but in the time, I was just like mad about it because I just hadn't slept, and there's crying babies and very stressful situation with C-sections and all that stuff. And anyways, I didn't actually have to go through it. I just had to sit there and but someone else. And maybe that was part of the thing. It's like I felt like I'm usually in control of situations and can help people, and now we're in a C-section situation, and nothing we had planned was going as planned, and then on top of that, the mother-in-law shows up an hour early, and anyways, I don't know.
I can somewhat relate to you because our oldest, he was born at 30 weeks, unexpectedly. I was going to school in Portland, and we were literally 6 hours away from driving up north to go back to Canada for my wife to stay with her parents until the baby was born.
Right. And
her water breaks in the middle of the night, and we go to the hospital, and 5 days later, here we have this American citizen, and like just completely out of control, no preparation, nothing. It was just, yeah. I can understand being stressed out in situations like that, and your reactions aren't always appropriate.
Right. So with that all comes back to if someone's reacting in a way that's not appropriate for the situation, there's probably something more behind it.
Yeah, right? and it would be better if we all assumed that, and that's where I think treating having a better expectation of people around us than perhaps we do normally is probably a good thing for that reason, and move beyond the labels that we put on people,
right.
Especially if you're going down like racially stereotypical labels or labels in general, and recognize that we're all members of the same human race. We're all trying for the same thing. We're all trying to be happy and successful in our lives. And the 0.1% of people who aren't doing that, there's something seriously wrong with them.
Definitely. And it reminds me of this meme, and I was trying to look it up, but I couldn't find it, where it's like, oh, there, I found it. It's like, oh, we should improve society somewhat. And then it's like someone saying, oh, and yet you participate in society. Curious. Right? It's like this, this person like that's the way you shouldn't be living your life. Isn't like just because somebody is participating in something, a political party or whatever, they aren't necessarily they don't agree with 100% of everything in there, right? They're not, whether you call them a socialist, a capitalist, whatever label you put on someone doesn't make them like 100% of whatever you think that is. Yeah. Because your understanding of that is based on your experience and your history.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, have you ever read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Mm-hmm. One of my favorite lines ever is from there. It's near the beginning of the book where the Earth is about to be destroyed, and it talks about. Is it near the beginning? Maybe it's farther in, but anyway, it talks about Nancy Millstone Jennings, I think is who the character is, who comes up with the idea that's going to solve all the world's problems and blah blah blah. And Douglas Adams makes the comment in the book that about 2,000 years after one man had been nailed to a tree for suggesting that maybe we should just be nice to everybody for a change.
Right.
That's
Yeah, exactly. It's so funny that though it's he had such a good take and on the universe and life and everything, really. 42. But in reality, it's definitely one of those things where you just look at it and go, if everyone, when you try and just tell people, hey, we should just be a little bit nicer to everyone, people tend to respond negatively in that way. But
they tend to say, yes, we should be nice to everybody except for those people.
Right.
But
and they say it about all the people.
Yep.
Whoever you talk to, there's people that they think that don't deserve the niceness.
Yep.
I don't know.
Anyway, we should probably wrap it up there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate the time that you're taking out of your holiday today. Speaking of trauma and National Truth and Reconciliation Day, right? Isn't that what it is here?
Yes. Yes, that's an orange shirt day, if the more colloquial start of it.
Yeah. And so it was a good conversation.
Thank you for having me.
So where can everybody find you, the Grant Alexander?
Yeah, if you want to find me, you can look on all the social media places and look for the Grant Alexander, and I'll usually pop up the first one. Look for an orange logo, and that'll be me. But
speaking of Orange Shirt Day, is that intentional for that reason, or is that just a coincidence?
Just a coincidence.
Because you said that was big for you, and so I'm just clicking in my head.
It's big for me for a couple of reasons. Just because I'm part Indigenous. My mother was taken from her family when she was born in the 50s, which they call the 60s scoop, which anyway started in the 50s. I don't know, whatever, they put names on stuff that make it so that people now go, well, how could it happen at 60s scoop? And she was born in 57. All that to say, she got taken as a kid. So I never grew up with my Indigenous heritage. But when I found out about it, I've tried to connect with that, and also recognizing I wouldn't exist if that traumatic thing hadn't happened to her. But that her trauma definitely affected me, right? It's such a weird place to live in when you go, that should never have happened, but if it never happened, I wouldn't be alive.
It's one of those things where what's the difference between a lump of coal and a diamond?
Right.
Nothing but a ton of pressure.
Right.
Or what's the difference between your average rough rock laying on the road and a polished stone? A lot of bloody trauma. That's what.
Right.
And that's where it's hard to. I get frustrated from my side when people try to erase the past. We shouldn't talk about that because it was negative for people, or it was traumatic and it caused this trauma. But it is part of our history, and it is what has created this point for us. We have got to this point because that has happened. Right.
Well, and I think there's two problems here. And if we got a little bit of time, we can. Do you want to put this in the after show?
I was about to say, why don't we just switch over to the after show now?
All right.
And use that as a what do you call it? A hook.
There you go.
So let's go.
So, thank you very much for having me on.
And let's continue our conversation in 30 seconds.
All right.
I just want to say thank you to the founding members of the Workshop Therapy Patreon family. Eric of Overall Makerworks, Keith Drennan of Blackthorn Concepts, Brad of Brad's Customs, Matthew Serio from Arciano Serio, and the Grant Alexander. If you want to join on Patreon to support the show or just say thank you, I'd appreciate it.